Biden has a theory of MAGA that just might be working. Now that Congress has passed the debt limit deal, explanations for President Biden's success in negotiating the outcome are abounding. Among them, Biden drew on his long experience in Washington to achieve bipartisan compromise. He avoided claiming a win so Republicans could support it. He didn't get distracted by the media's second-guessing. Here's another way to understand this unexpected outcome. Biden is operating from a largely unappreciated theory of MAGA, and in some ways, it's working. Passage of the deal, which averts default and economic calamity, was decisively bipartisan. The Senate approved it Thursday night with 17 Republicans backing it, after it passed the House with support from more than two-thirds of House Republicans. This happened even though the deal's spending cuts are not close to what Republicans sought. Yes, the outcome legitimizes the debt limit as a tool of extortion and imposes cruel new work requirements on many food stamp recipients. But Republicans didn't use this showdown to crash or cripple the economy, as some observers, including me, worried they might. Biden's theory of MAGA helps explain this outcome. Biden ran in 2020 on the idea that the country faced an existential threat from the far right, highlighting white supremacy, political violence, and President Donald Trump's unprecedented attacks on democracy. This year's re-election launch highlighted the assault on the Capitol and cast MAGA extremists as a threat to American freedom. However, in promising to restore the soul of the nation in the face of this threat, Biden has continually distinguished between MAGA Republicans and more conventional ones. This approach has been criticized by those of us who see much of the GOP as extreme and dangerous. After all, many elected Republicans helped whitewash Trump's insurrection, and think Biden's characterization of non-MAGA Republicans plays down that broader threat. But Biden's reading served him well in the debt limit standoff. Contrary to much criticism, Biden world believes that refusing to negotiate at the outset was key. It forced Republicans to offer their own budget, which created an opening to attack the savage spending cuts in it. Notably, Biden and other Democrats relentlessly characterized those cuts as destructive and dangerous in the MAGA vein. Biden world did believe that some MAGA Republicans were willing to default and force global economic cataclysm to harm the president's re-election, a senior Biden advisor tells me, but also that many non-MAGA Republicans ultimately could be induced not to go that far. That seems to be what happened. As political scientist Jonathan Bernstein points out, the outcome falsified the prediction that the GOP as a party would use that leverage to inflict maximum chaos. Meanwhile, the cuts themselves won't be nearly as damaging to the economy as the ones in the 2011 standoff, as the New York Times' Paul Krugman explains. This illuminates Biden world's broader theory of the MAGA GOP. The way to defeat the MAGA threat to the country is to marginalize it within the GOP coalition, that is, to contain it. He has never hesitated to call out the extreme MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Kate Bedingfield, a senior advisor to the 2020 Biden campaign and to the White House through February, told me. But he gives Republican voters and legislators who reject that wing of the party a place to go. Something similar happened in the 2022 elections. Biden and Democrats in tough races tried to strike a balance between reaching out to Republican voters and GOP-leaning independents while casting MAGA extremism as a clear and present danger to the country. It worked. Many prominent MAGA senatorial and gubernatorial candidates lost, partly because many Republican voters decided to vote Democratic. The debt limit outcome was far from a uniform victory. Most of the GOP did engage in hostage-taking and debt limit extortion throughout much of the process, legitimizing extreme tactics before balking at going all the way. Despite all this, the fact that so many non-MAGA Republicans voted for the deal, and that Democrats and Republicans alike are celebrating this as a bipartisan success, could mean the party as a whole isn't broadly perceived as extreme and hostage to MAGA heading into 2024. The downside of the deal is that it gives vulnerable House Republicans separation from their MAGA counterparts. Dan Senna, a senior Democratic operative during the 2018 Democratic House takeover, told me. That could be a challenge. There is a tension in Biden's approach to the GOP. His initial rationale for running was that the GOP is largely hostage to an extremism that foundationally threatens the American experiment. His re-election case is that he has begun to defuse that threat and another term will complete that task. Yet Biden also plainly believes that conducting the nation's business on a bipartisan basis is inherently stabilizing. That sometimes requires treating the opposition, or a large swath of it, as a mostly conventional political party, which risks mitigating perceptions of the threat it poses. In the debt limit outcome, that tension proved far more navigable than many, including me, expected. How this tension will play out in 2024 is hard to predict, but for now, the Biden theory of MAGA has mostly been vindicated. Biden has a theory of MAGA that just might be working. Now that Congress has passed the debt limit deal, explanations for President Biden's success in negotiating the outcome are abounding. Among them, Biden drew on his long experience in Washington to achieve bipartisan compromise. He avoided claiming a win so Republicans could support it. He didn't get distracted by the media's second-guessing. Hey, race, another way to understand this unexpected we didn't default. The Republican Party is still a huge problem. The 4-month-long Washington drama over the debt ceiling is likely to end without much changing. No default. Or cuts to Social Security and Medicare. Or huge reductions to other programs. Or the dethroning of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Or the invocation of the 14th Amendment by President Biden. That's good news right now, but it's worrisome in the long term. Like many on the political left, I was nervous for much of May. It seemed as if Biden was so desperate for a deal to raise the debt ceiling that he would accept major spending cuts and work requirements for programs such as Medicaid that would have led to millions of people losing benefits. It also seemed that Biden and his aides were too quick to dismiss the 14th Amendment and other options to avoid surrendering to the Republicans' demands because of the president's preferences for bipartisanship and following traditional Washington norms. But the final deal isn't terrible. I am disappointed that a precedent was reinforced that Republicans can use the debt ceiling to hold the nation hostage and accomplish policy goals that they otherwise couldn't. Keeping spending at 2023 levels, as the agreement calls for, constitutes a small cut because of inflation. The agreement is really bad on student loans, mandating the restart of payments, even as the Supreme Court is likely to invalidate Biden's loan cancellation program. Cuts in Internal Revenue Service funding, the approval of a gas pipeline in parts of Virginia and West Virginia, and expanded work requirements for people to get financial assistance to purchase food are flawed policies. But my worst fears were not realized. The great news is that the debt ceiling will be raised until 2025, so Republicans can't use it as a weapon before the presidential election. It's also really good news, and somewhat surprising to me, that McCarthy and other Republicans weren't so determined to weaken Biden politically that they were willing to destroy the economy either by forcing a default or imposing huge, job-killing cuts in spending. The absence of large-scale terrible policies in this agreement